on the campaign trail yesterday, he was being asked by an interview about his like numbers around tariffs. He says randomly, because originally it was a 10% tariff and then became a 20% tariff, and then it was like a 50% tariff on Chinese goods, and then while on top of a 20% tariff for all goods, and now recently an interview is saying 10% again. And so people are like, what are the numbers on these tariffs? What are they going to be? And then he says, don't worry. He says essentially, don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about the numbers. I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there. 100%, 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%. I don't care. I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, well, I'm not listening to it, I'm reading it. I don't know why I said listen to it. I truly am delirious from being sick. I'm thinking, what if you're trying to convince people that you're going to bring stability and economic success, and you're going to be going in front of the Economic Club of Chicago, or you're going to be going in front of interviewers where actual economists are going to ask you questions that are then presented to the public? Like, if you're just throwing out random numbers, not only are you going to cause a panic amongst them, which they're going to ask you about in big interviews like this, and he said this before, the day before he goes in front of the Economic Club of Chicago to be interviewed by Bloomberg, which is the financial rag. They're the rag that comes out and talks about finances. That's their thing, man. And he, the day before, is just saying like random whatever numbers for what the tariff could be. It doesn't make any sense. Not only does it make any sense, it also is causing panic amongst market speculators and amongst those who are, investing, because they are betting on increased inflation from Trump, from his big, and I can't believe I have to say this, but the Republican candidate, the big handouts. He keep making more promises on the campaign trail to drag more attention back to his campaign. And the promises have increased not only the deficit spending, where now most economists agree, and you can just do a plan to plan comparison, that Donald Trump's plan would increase the deficit by trillions more than the Harris plan, which is, the Republican's supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility. He's the businessman, but I mean, he's also run multiple, companies into bankruptcy. So I don't know how much you can say he's the fiscal responsibility champion, especially running at such a high deficit during peacetime. But economists are running these predictions. He starts throwing out these random numbers all before this interview. And then the interviewer that he got today was tough. He was sturdy, and he was the chief editor for Bloomberg. So I was expecting, some a little bit here, some a little bit there. But then Trump got confrontational with him, which then got it only worse. And then it just spiraled from there, because the reporter asked follow-ups. And I think that really messed with Trump, because he was trying to dodge the questions by telling stories and giving like, okay, you say you're going to bring down the debt, or you're going to do all this stuff. What's with the spending then? What's with the spending proposals that, economists are saying? And then he just start answering a question that wasn't asked, or telling a story, but not answering what his plan is. And it just went bad. And so I watched most of it, but I also was going in and out of it because I was sick and falling asleep and waking up, falling asleep, waking up. So we're going to watch some of it. I don't know how much of it we're going to watch, but I'll tell you that I think this is going to be the toughest interview Trump is going to get moving forward. Because after this interview was done, his team then canceled more interviews. They immediately went out and they canceled another interview he's supposed to be on, and another interview he's supposed to be on. And so it seems like Trump is largely being put into podcasts now, podcast bubbles, rallies in front of his supporters, and favorable interview environments, because this was not a favorable interview environment, and it didn't go well. And I think it showed Trump's decline most visibly, because they didn't push back, because when he was, pushed back on in the slightest by asking follow-ups, it seemed like he didn't really have he either attacked the interviewer, or he just kind of flailed. Let's watch the interview. Bloomberg. Okay, this is the interviewer. He's the editor-in-chief for Bloomberg. Now let me say that room is full of a lot of Trump supporters. And so the crowd he gets a mixed reaction from the crowd, but there's always a few people clapping for him on every answer. But I mean, these interviews, it's not about just watching the interview in its entirety. When it comes to the vast majority of the public, a lot of what matters is the clips. And so I don't know how much the clapping really matters, optically. I mean, if you give a bat crazy answer, it can be still examined as a bat crazy answer, no matter how many cheers and hollers you get from the crowd. But let's watch.
I like that crowd. That's a nice group of people. Thank you very much.
Standing ovation.
Welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
President Trump, thank you for doing this, as we said, and you heard the reception there. The business people of Chicago, like everywhere else, they like a lot of the things you want to do in terms of tax cuts and some of the spending proposals, but like many business people, what they're often worried about is the cost. And the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a bipartisan outfit, put out some predictions the other day. If you add up all the promises you've made, and your plans would add $7.5 trillion to the debt. That's more than twice the total for Vice President Harris. You're on course to push up debt up to 150% of GDP. You know, this is a very business-like audience.
Yeah.
Why should they trust you with that?
Because we're about growth. She's got no growth whatsoever, and we're all about growth. We're going to bring companies back to our country. You look at even today as I was driving over.
That's okay. Mind you, again, and this is going to be a repeating factor the entire interview. The question was about, and remember, these are the Republicans. These are supposed to be the finance hawks. These are supposed to be the guys that are all about cutting the social services, cutting the handouts, quote unquote. Well, Trump's on the campaign trail promising handouts. They're supposed to be the ones about reeling in the budget. And currently, the Democrat nominee for president has a plan that if you combine all of her promises, that makes it about half of what his debt increase would be. And that's after Donald Trump, while president, increased the deficit extraordinarily for a peacetime period for when you go on the historical record. As in, I think outside of Lincoln and I think one other president, he was increasing the debt the most. So, I mean, Lincoln had a good excuse. What was Donald Trump's excuse for the deficit increase when he said he was going to get rid of the debt in 4 years? Again, an incredible promise, an impossible to achieve promise no matter what Donald Trump did. But the first thing to getting rid of the debt is to get rid of the deficit, and he increased the deficit.
I see these empty, old, beautiful, like steel mills and factories that are empty and falling down. Some have been converted to senior citizens' homes, but that's not going to do the trick. And we're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs, because I'm a believer in tariffs. I'm not sure that you are. I don't think you are, but I congratulate you on your career. But to me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. And it's my favorite word. It needs a public relations firm to help it, but to me,
See, if you look at the crowd, most people aren't clapping. You see, it's most of them seem to be on the left-hand side of the screen. But he does have some supporters in the crowd here. But a business crowd, definitely a Bloomberg business crowd, is not going to love the word tariff in really almost any scenario. And Trump, again, is a very aggressive tariff policy.
Beautiful word in the.
I mean, if you're a manufacturer who has to bring in foreign imports of steel or aluminum or other foreign minerals, a 20% tariff on all goods imported is going to mean increased costs for you. It's going to probably be then passed down to the consumers who buy your goods. Many of them, presumably American, would then have to pay more for those goods. Or if you're an American that's buying a good from overseas that are being imported, then the cost is more directly brought upon you. But point is, though, a lot of that cost could be passed down to consumers or the manufacturers that are relying on foreign imports. So generally speaking, those crowds are not going to be super excited about that policy.
Tariffs.
Now, if you're a steel manufacturer, then maybe the steel tariff for you works because it's on your specific industry and allows you to be more competitive. But that also means that the people who are relying on steel are then going to have to pay an increased cost. So you help the steel manufacturer at the expense of those who are consuming steel, but you could maybe justify it for something like, I don't know, microchips or stuff that are necessary for national security purposes. He's talking about a 20% tariff across all goods. So like chocolates from Belgium, how does that help anybody?
Tariffs, do you think that will bring in the revenues? To use another bipartisan group,
Yeah.
Peterson Institute, they say they only bring in $200 billion. That is that's barely the cost of two of your promises.
Yeah, but that's like for what company are you talking about, okay? Look, I've brought in with tariffs, and I was just getting started. Then COVID came, and we had because I tell you what, I did a very good job in COVID. Nobody knew what the hell it was. I call it the China virus because I like being a little more accurate.
Mind you, we were talking about the deficit. We've talked about adding productive capacity, and then he talked about tariffs. Now we're covering C-19. What happened to the deficit? What happened to we just boom, we're just gone. We just completely just steered off the road.
But when that came, but we got hundreds of billions of dollars just from China alone, and I hadn't even started yet. But tariffs are two things, if you look at it. Number one is for protection of the companies that we have here and the new companies that will move in, because we're
okay, but the companies that don't have to rely on any foreign imports, which many of them do because we're a global center of trade.
We're going to have thousands of companies coming into this country. We're going to grow it like it's never grown before, and we're going to protect them when they come in because we're not going to have somebody undercut them. And I could give you an example of this if you want. Would you like me to? Because it just
give me a quick example, then I will come back.
I just found out about it. So I've been talking about for the last year about Detroit and how horribly it has been. You know, it's just horrible because we've been talking about Detroit's coming back for 40 years, and it's never come back. And it's very dependent on the car industry. Well, they've lost 60% of the business over a long period of time. And what happened is I found out a friend of mine builds auto plants. That's all he does. He builds auto plants. That's what he's good at. He doesn't want to build an apartment. All he wants to build is, and he builds the biggest in the world. And for the last year and a half, if anybody's heard me speak, I was talking about Mexico is a tremendous challenge for us right now. Tremendous. China is building.
We were talking about the deficit. Why? What happened?
Massive auto plants in Mexico, and they're going to build them, and they're going to take those cars and sell them into the United States.
Mind you, the fact that Republicans are pivoting off the issue of the deficit when that was supposed to be their issue, their strong ground, it's an admission of two things. Number one, that the Republicans have lost the high ground on the deficit. You talk about the deficit as Republicans right now. Like when I hear them get angry about giving all the money to the Republican plan is going to massively balloon the deficit no matter what Kamala Harris handout she promises, and that she'd have to promise so much in the next 20 days for her commitments on deficit increases to get anywhere near Trump's. And so they've lost the high ground when talking about things like increase in spending on social services, stuff like that. They can still attack it, and they will. I think a lot of it is from just the fact that it's comfortable after doing it for so many years. But they've lost the high ground, and I think it's also indicative of the fact that deficit spending or the issue with the debt is just not a big issue this election. It is not a big motivating factor for voters. The big motivating factors for voters is the economy, immigration, defense of democracy, and then you can go down a few other, but none of them, no matter how far down you go, until maybe issue 10 or 11, is going to be, reduction of the deficit or the debt. So I think that, Trump just doesn't care about it. I mean, frankly, he didn't do well on it the first term. He promised a lot in the first term around deficits, delivered nothing on it. And so why make those commitments again if voters don't seem to care at the moment? Why hold the high ground for this area that Republicans, used to stick their flag in? Why be a Rand Paul when you can be somebody getting votes by promising things? I mean, it's simple as that.
Very near the border, and they're going to have all the advantages and none of the disadvantages, and that's going to be the end of Michigan. It's going to be the end of...
Abortion is a top issue too, Dylan? Yes, abortion. Sorry. I was trying to think of the fourth one and I forgot.
Frankly, South Carolina, going to be the end of everything. So I've been talking about this, and I said to him about 9 months ago, I said, you know what? I want you to do me a favor, John. His name is John. I don't want to give his last name because he might not like it. But I said, I want to see an auto plant. I want to go and see one of these. You press a button and everything works, right? I want to see one of the big ones. He said, all right, good. I said, where do we go? I'd like to go to Michigan. I'd like to go to someplace in the United States. He said, no, we can't do that. Why? We're not building anything big in the United States. That's not where we don't build the big ones here. I said, where are you building the biggest ones? He said, in Mexico. We're building giant plants, the biggest plants anywhere in the world. In Mexico, I said, so you mean they're going to make cars cheaply? They have advantages over labor and other things, and they're going to sell them into the United States, and they're going to put Michigan out of business. Is that what?
Thanks,
I don't know anything about that. All I do is build the plants. If you want to see a plant, we'll go to Mexico. I'll show you the biggest plant in the world. That was 9 months ago.
We were talking about the deficit. Now we're all the way over. Whatever.
I saw him, and I talked about it all.
We're talking about Mexican plants now. Like, what? Again, it's supposed to be their strong suit. It's supposed to be their arena, and now they've completely abandoned it. Since the political winds went that way or this way, now it's...
Because I think it's a serious threat to our country, because not only autos, but other things. So then I see him 2 days ago. I was talking at another club, very nice club, and like this, except, I don't know, I think you people are probably even wealthier, okay? This was in Detroit, okay, which was appropriate. And I was showing them all sorts of charts about how their car, it's just gone down. It's like terrible. And I saw him, and I said, "Oh, how are you doing? How have you been?" I said, "Could I ask you, how are those plants that you mentioned, those giant plants that you're building in Mexico, how is that coming along? Have you finished them?" "No, sir. They abandoned the project when they heard you're running. They abandoned the project when they saw that you were winning and doing well." I said, "Wow."
All the same.
See, the thing is, the way Trump answers questions the entirety of this interview, remember, we were in the deficit. This doesn't have to do anything with the deficit. But the way he answers all these questions is to tell stories, like in this instance, that are completely unrelated, or B, to just tell stories that are at least somewhat unrelated. I mean, somewhat related. It's just like storytelling. And that's like good for an audience. He's not speaking necessarily to the crowd here. He's speaking to the people who are going to hear these stories and say, wow, he's going to be in that position up there and he's going to fight for me. And so if you look at the broad swath of promises he's making and you look at them all in the eye and you say, he can't deliver this, he can't deliver this, he can't deliver this. Like, that doesn't matter because the narrative that is being sown, the storytelling is more powerful. The storytelling has a truth of its own, even if it's not 100% truthful, that it can deliver a lot of these promises, or has the margins in the Congress or Senate or otherwise to deliver them, or that it would be fiscally responsible to deliver them. Like, for example, the tariff policy, which I don't think is fiscally responsible.
I told them, and I said it publicly, they're not going to sell one car into the United States. I said, if I run this country, if I'm going to be president of this country, I'm going to put a 100, 200, 2,000% tariff. They're not going to sell one car into the United States because we're not going to destroy our country because I know you're an anti-tariff guy, but I'm the exact opposite.
Okay, let me throw this out there, though. If we institute these tariffs and we cannot make domestic alternatives fast enough, that will mean the price of whatever good you do this to, whether it be cars or any other manufactured good, or especially if it's any import we cannot replace in the short term, or if in some instances it'll be even medium to long term, because not everything can be made in America. I'm sure most things can, even if they're going to be made much more expensive. But for the short to medium term, that's going to mean more expensive cars across the board because that'll mean less supply into the United States. And then we'll have to produce more domestically. But in the meantime, even though at the end of the day, they're going to be paying more, in the meantime, the smaller supply is then going to be priced higher because the supply is then lower than the demand. And so that's going to even if it's not just this one company, it'll cause a price increase across the board. Now, you could justify that if in the long term it's economically more beneficial. But he's talking about tariffs not on like strategically important goods, or even just to cradle industries that are declining in the United States. He's talking about a tariff on literally everything, including the things we don't have domestic alternatives, even in the medium to long term.
If I had, there was no other way I could have stopped them other than, what am I going to do, negotiate with Mexico, with China? You're not going to get anything from that. I said I'm going to put a 100, 200, or 300. I'm going to put the highest tariff in history, meaning I'm going to stop them from ever selling a car into the United States. So I just see the guy by accident. I see him. He says, "Sir, they've abandoned those." And by the way, they built foundations. They were really rocking. They were going to do it. They thought that I was going to win, or maybe they're just holding off. I tell you this. If I don't win, those factories are going to wipe out this country. They're the biggest factories ever built for cars. They're going to wipe out our country. If she wins, and she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. If she wins, she's not going to be thinking about, I couldn't, every speech I made having to do with cars, but every speech I made having to do with tariffs, I'd mentioned that our country is being threatened by Mexico. Now, all of those things, beyond even the car companies, all of those things are now dead. They're dead. I asked him, will they start? Probably not. They're dead as a doornail. If she gets in, it'll start up again.
President Trump, I let you give your example.
No,
The question was tariffs. I'm sorry. This is the thing. Trump, he has stories he wants to tell. And so every question is just an opportunity to get to the story that he wants to tell. And sometimes like he won't even bother like weaving it together. He calls it the weave, which is just a polite way to say dodge. It's a more fun way to say dodge a question. He's marketing it better. He weaves over, and sometimes he doesn't even bother to connect it to the related question.
A lot about tariffs. You look at the American economy, 40 million jobs rely on trade. It accounts for 27% of GDP.
Okay.
If you cut that off, that's also going to have an effect on many, many business people here.
Yeah.
Tariffs also have another side. Isn't that something that you have to acknowledge?
No.
You could be plunging America into the biggest trade war since Smoot-Hawley.
But there are no tariffs.
You're going to stop. There are tariffs already at the moment.
There are no tariffs. All you have to do is build your plant in the United States, and you don't have any tariffs.
But people, a lot of places like this, there are a lot of jobs that rely on foreigners coming here. You're going to basically stop trade with China. You're talking about 60% tariffs on that. You're talking, as you said, 100, 200% on things you don't really like. You're also talking about 10, 20% tariffs on the rest of the world. That is going to have a serious effect on the overall economy. And yes, you're going to find some people who will gain from individual tariffs. The overall effect could be massive in terms of the economy.
I agree it's going to have a massive effect, positive effect. It's going to be a positive, not a negative.
Well,
let me just no.
That's all it takes to get a clap. It's like, you're right. It will have a massive effect. And it'll be based. That's all it takes, man. That's all it takes. Why would we tariff chocolate imports from Belgium? Why would we tariff like these random, that's not related to national security? It's not even related to making domestic alternatives in the United States. Some of these things will not be. The 10 to 20% won't even be enough to create a domestic market, to create an alternative. And so you'll just be increasing the price of these goods. And some of these, it's not even possible. There are domestic alternatives that can be made for certain projects or certain items. But when you're talking about a 20% broad tariff across the board, this isn't like calculated, precise tariff policy to protect certain industries, protect national security. This is just a broad-based increase in costs for every good across the board, with the hope that therefore that increased cost will cause companies to make alternatives domestically. But for the ones that it's still not profitable enough to do that, they'll just simply increase the cost of their product and maybe just sell goods elsewhere where it's more profitable to sell them.
I know how committed you are to this, and it must be hard for you to, spend 25 years talking about tariffs as being negative, and then have somebody explain to you that you're totally wrong. It'll have a negative. It will have. I'll go a step further.
40 million,
if you don't
40
do
million,
this,
President Trump, 40 million jobs is a lot of jobs to rely on.
They're all coming back.
Those are 40 million jobs. Those are 40 million jobs in America that rely on trade.
Are you ready? John Deere, great company. They announced.
See, it's another story. It's another story. Instead of talking about 40 million jobs, or 42 or 43 million jobs, instead of Trump will talk about is just personal negotiations with one or two companies. But you're not going to save or control the waves and flows of the American economy by just talking to one company or one business owner or what. You need to make broad-based policies for everyone. Individual exceptions or individual policy from individual company, that isn't an explanation for the 43 million jobs. John Deere doesn't employ 43 million people. He could tell 5 stories that doesn't lead to 43 million people being employed. He needs to talk about broad-based policy. He doesn't just, well, here's the story of this one time where I went to this one guy and I negotiated tough, and after tough negotiations, I was able to get something. Okay, that's great. But most people don't build tractors.
About a year ago, they're going to build big plants outside of the United States, right? They're going to build them in Mexico.
And you threatened them with tariffs and they stopped.
That's right. I said, if John Deere builds those plants, they're not selling anything into the United States. They just announced yesterday they're probably not going to build the plants, okay? I kept the jobs here, and I'll keep them. John Deere will stay here. And I'll tell John Deere, if you do build outside of the United States, you can if you want. For instance, India is a very tough country. It's not only China. You know, China is the I would say probably the toughest, but there are a lot of tough. You know what's very tough? European Union. Our beautiful European countries, wonderful, wonderful. If you add them up, they're almost the size of us. They treat us so badly. We have a deficit. I said to Angela Merkel when she was there, she's not there anymore, I wonder why, but when she was there, I said, Angela, how many Chevrolets do we have in Berlin? Why, Donald, you have none. He said, that's right. How many Fords do we have in Frankfurt? I don't know. None. I said, that's right. You know how many cars we have? Mercedes-Benz and BMW and all of the different Volkswagen. Millions and millions of cars. And then I said farm products. You know, they don't want our farm products. They don't want anything from us. We have deficits that are crazy, and we're not going to have them anymore. We're going to put tariffs on them, and they're going to do, and you know what they can do? The Mercedes-Benz will start building in the United States, and they have a little bit, but you know what they really are? Assembly, like in South Carolina. But they build everything in Germany, and then they assemble it here. They get away.
What happens when those countries, once you put a 20% tariff on like every single country, those countries respond by putting similar tariffs back on American goods? And then you're going to hurt all the jobs, including those manufacturing that are able to export goods. Like, creating better conditions in the United States is not just going to be achieved by punishing those who choose to do business elsewhere. You should start by trying to improve the conditions in the United States.
Away with murder.
Like, it's not like it's, if he was to talk about selective tariffs here, he could make a really strong populist message. But this 20% tariff is just a sledgehammer to an issue that needs a scalpel. It's a complete rejection of the idea that tariffs have any negative. Like, when he suggested at any point, anyone suggests to him, hey, this will mean increased costs for the consumer, he completely rejects that basic economic logic. You should accept the economic logic, because you could say, fine, it does increase, but in the long term, we'll have domestic alternatives. He could make that argument for select industries, for industries that are of a national security purpose. He could say that these cities and towns have nothing else to rely on, and until there is an alternative, we need to protect these communities, et cetera, et cetera. He could make that argument. But instead, he takes a sledgehammer to a complicated issue, says tariff everything, bang, and then expects there to be no reaction from the international scale. There's a reason why there are people out there, economic experts, that are talking about a Trump presidency, meaning a reduction in buying power for the average consumer. And it's not because all of a sudden Americans are going to start getting paid less in their jobs. It's because there's a fear about an increase in inflation and an increase in this trickle down of costs from policies like this that make no economic sense. And so that's why Trump has had to rely on like promising handout and massive tax cuts in order to try to attract people from the business community. But I mean, the handouts, many of them still have problems with, like the host here, and the tax cuts they might love, but that just makes the deficit issue worse.
Because they say, oh, yes, we're building cars. They don't build cars. They take them out of a box and they assemble them. We could have our child do it.
Can we come back? Let's come back to the Europeans in a second. What about consumers? People out there.
They're going to be the biggest beneficiary.
Critics say your tariffs will end up being like a national sales tax.
Nope.
Because
the countries.
if you add.
He's just like, nope, it won't. When we tariff a bunch of industries that we won't have short-term replacements for, or other stuff that we like. You can only make Belgian chocolates in Belgium. I guess you can make different American chocolate, but it's like the idea that it's can cause no, like, for the stuff that we need to import for the complicated electronic stuff that we don't have domestically. What's there where there is no alternative? Like, what is that going to mean? Like a 20% tariff on Taiwanese microchips. What does that mean? What does that mean for those who need those components? Because those factories that we're building in Arizona and in Texas and otherwise, for these microchips, they're not going to be up and running until like 2027, 2028. The CHIPS Act like helped, but it's not going to just boom. They're not just going to magically appear in the desert. So by the end of his 4-year term is when these factories are probably going to start, if we're lucky and everything stays to schedule, which often it doesn't, is going to start opening. So he implements this tariff at the start of his term. I mean, what are we going to do for those alternatives? And he's not really talking about exemptions. He's talking about a broad board tariff on all goods.
If you have, America at the moment has $3 trillion worth of imports, you're going to add tariffs to every single one of them. That is going to push up the cost for all those people who want to buy foreign goods.
Now, what's going
That is
to
just
happen?
simple mathematics, President Trump.
It's not. Yeah, it is, but not the way you figured. I was always very good at mathematics.
Yes.
Let me tell you, you're saying $3 trillion.
That's $3 trillion worth of imports.
And they don't have to pay. And if, by the higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into the
higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to have to pay in shops.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many.
Like, what about this? Because it's not just about building the factory. When we talk about some of these companies overseas, they have like expertise or knowledge or like climate conditions or resources. These are all like things that are just like, we have lithium in the United States. Do we think we have enough lithium in the United States to manufacture all of the stuff that requires lithium in the United States? We have, and if we do, is that developed enough for it to be good enough for the first year, 2 years of Trump's term when he institutes these policies, presumably? Like, do we have the trained labor force to replace all of these goods and industries overseas? If we finally do get our factories up, are these factories going to be producing at be more productive than the other countries that have specialized on it? Are we going to be able to produce more than they are? Are we going to be able to compete with them on the international market? Or are these going to be factories that are essentially just manufacturing goods for Americans, and therefore they're going to have, let's say there's a recession in the United States and they cannot sell to Americans and they have to look for other markets? Well, if they're in this little economic bubble, they're not going to be able to compete with these other companies in fucking China or in Japan or in Germany or in Spain or in France or wherever it is, man, or in Nigeria and Senegal. It doesn't matter. If he was to just accept some downside to this policy, then I would find some attachment to reality here. But he can't, because he doesn't want to market any downside. He doesn't want to accept any downside, even though, of course, tariffs have a downside. It's not like this money comes from nowhere. Who has to pay it? Do you think that these companies are just going to accept the cost purely on themselves and not pass any of it down to the consumer?
As you know, that will take many.
Let me answer your question. If it became more expensive at Trump International Hotel, 20% more expensive to operate, would that mean that Donald Trump would pass all of that cost onto himself or on to the people who stay at Trump Hotel? Or maybe 50-50. Even if it's 50-50, 10% increase is still a 10% increase.
Years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking about, all.
Let me be clear. He keeps saying, like, the tariffs, we're going to collect so much money. It will not be enough to counterbalance the large-scale deficit spending that he is proposing. Tariffs are not a magical money-making machine. The cost, number one, is passed down to American consumers, so that's one problem. And so the way he's selling this is, we're going to get everybody else to pay us. But at the end of the day, it is the American consumer that's going to have the cost passed down to them. So it's Americans being penalized on the goods that they want to buy that is paying the tariff. So saying it's not a tax, like, you can say it's not a direct tax, but it is certainly an indirect tax. So that's the first thing. So you're reducing the consuming power that Americans have, which is the main problem that people have with inflation, by the way, is the reduction in consuming power. So you're doing the same negative thing to the American people that you've been complaining about for years now about inflation. Even if it's by another path, you're still ending at the same destination of less consuming power. At the same time, where economists are predicting that due to these handouts that Trump wants to do, due to the increase in spending, that there is going to be an inflation increase if he was to deliver on these promises. Now, Trump could, of course, not deliver on all the promises, but then that's its own problem, isn't it? Making commitments that you can't deliver on, or you never intended on delivering on. I mean, it's like the maternity promises when he was running his first term against Hillary. Hillary proposed that mothers, as they give birth, should have mandatory time off. And then Trump immediately followed afterwards with a policy somewhat similar, but a reduced amount of time off, and then he didn't move on it at all during his presidency. I mean, he could do that, but if your best argument for somebody from Trump's camp is, well, you know, it won't be so bad if Trump doesn't deliver on his promises, it's not a particularly strong argument.
Reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in, the tariff has to be a lot higher.
Dylan, you're doing straw man after straw hand, and your arguments are misleading. Okay. Then just tell me what's the problem. Well, don't just say I'm misleading or doing a straw man, because then you know what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, what is he referring to? And of course, I'm me, so I think I'm right, and you're you, so you think you're right. So just say it. Don't just, you know, you say misleading, XYZ reason why. It'd be easier.
Higher than 10%, because 10% is not enough. Guys, they're not going to do it for 10. But you make a 50% tariff, they're going to come in. Let me tell you the other thing about tariffs that's great. Our steel companies, as you know, 3-4 years ago, they were all going. When I was in office, I saw a man from a big steel company, and he was devastated. I knew him for a long time, and it's been a tough business. It was a great business many years ago, and I would not let U.S. steel be sold to Japanese, by the way. It's psychologically, I think it would be
That's the Nippon steel, as you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't let. Yeah.
Can we look? I would appreciate this much more if he would answer the question, then give his like stories. But what he does is he just starts with the stories with no concrete answer to the question. Like if someone came up to me and said, Dylan, you're bad at fiscal management. You say that you want to stay out of homelessness, but look at how much money you've spent on like luxury cars, assuming that I've spent money on luxury cars. I don't own a car. And then instead of talking about that, I start talking about, well, actually, I've only DoorDashed once every month. And when you think about it, DoorDashing once every month to your average streamer, you know, that's not relate. Like that might be a good fiscal decision. But if your one decent fiscal decision is outbalanced, where your one deal here, one deal there is outbalanced by terrible, terrible, terrible economic policy, like it feels like sometimes I hear the complaint about, oh my God, this is a weird comparison. Sometimes I hear the complaint about Syrskyi, and maybe this is true, maybe it isn't. I'm not there with Ukrainian command. Is that the problem is that there'll be broad problems across the entire front line, and people will then start. Syrskyi is one of the accused people that does this, but it doesn't really matter if he does or not for this comparison, just any general. They'll concentrate on this one area of the front and start micromanaging parts of it. And then they can like get a better arrangement in that one part of the front. But if it's a systemic problem along the entire front line, like you've solved this problem on this very minute part of the front, or this one deal, because $1.7 billion for an airplane, or $2 billion here or there, it helps. But when you're talking about the trillions upon trillions upon $1 trillion, as we're an international center of trade that passes through the United States every year, it's really minute in the grand scheme of things. So these stories are nice for, you know, storytelling. These stories are nice for getting across the point that on an individual deal-making basis, he has gotten some good deals for the United States from his perspective, because of course you got to remember, he's the one retelling the stories, and we know how he likes to exaggerate. But when it comes to policy making, this means nothing. It's just like I'm going to bed and he's tucking me in with a bedtime story about how he saved America with on money here, on money there, on money everywhere. I just want more specific policy answers before he goes into story time.
Yeah, I wouldn't let it be so, but I would I would stop it if it hasn't been completed by the time I'm president, because I think it sets a horrible tone. But I had a lot to do with steel. We were going to lose all our steel companies because China, as you remember, was dumping steel at levels that nobody's ever seen before. And I put a 50% tax on that and a tariff on that, all dumped steel. And it was also bad steel. It was what they call dirty steel. It wasn't good steel, which is a bad thing for structural components of buildings and planes and things like that.
Oh, sorry, we're buffering bad right now. I'm waiting for the frames to pick up again. Oh, they're back. Sorry, we're we're in a little bit of a war zone here.
They were dumping crap into our country. and I put a 50% tariff. I started at 25, I raised it to 50 because the 25 didn't quite do it. I raised it to 50 and that did it. They stopped dumping steel. And I saved our steel mills by having that. We saved it. We saved our steel. Now, what was left, because we've lost so much, but there are certain companies...
He doesn't talk, of course, he's a marketer. He's not going to talk about the downsides. But the downsides of that is anybody that had to deal with steel or aluminum. He's not talking about the aluminum tariffs here, but this was included. These steel and aluminum tariffs increase costs for example, if you're a canned good, let's say you make Campbell's soup. Now, for immediately speaking, it doesn't make sense why, Campbell's soup, why would they have to pay more now of soup production? Well, where do they put their soup in? They put them in aluminum cans. So increased costs on them because they have to get more expensive aluminum elsewhere. And so you've maybe saved one part of the American economy. There's one industry, or you've maybe been able to help plateau and not even decline it. Because a lot of it isn't even recovery. It's, hey, we've plateaued the job loss. Like that's what happened with coal mining in West Virginia. They didn't massively increase coal recruitment or like coal jobs in West Virginia by, shoveling the money he did into West Virginia. He just plateaued it before it then started to decrease again. The success of that needs to be good enough or helpful enough to justify the negative effects of the past costs to all the other industries that are reliant on those inputs.
You have to have, there are certain things you have to have. Steel, you have to have. If you go to war, there's a possibility you go to war. I kept us out of war. I was the only president in 82 years that kept you out of a war, except I defeated ISIS, but I inherited that war. No wars. And by the way...
Mind you, he maintained most, if not all, of the current wars we were carrying out. So, I don't know. If Obama ended his term and we were still fighting like the war in Iraq in the way that, we were fighting in 2008, we're like I don't know how much he can really, I didn't start any new wars. It's like, well, he just kind of kept everything. Like when Nixon replaced LBJ, could we say he was the peace candidate because he didn't start a new war, but he continued the bombing in Vietnam before the withdrawal? Like, I don't know if you could really give him credit for that. By the way, Trump did increase the bombing in Afghanistan before the withdrawal.
By the way, and I think it's very important, you can go, I call it the weave. You can call it, you have the weave as long as you end up in the right location at the end. But while we're talking about it, we have never been so close to World War III as we are right now, with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East.
Well, let's.
I had no wars in the whole world. Think of it. And I talked him out of wars. I talked plenty of countries out of wars.
See, now to be clear, now he's not even saying that he didn't start any new wars. Now he's saying that there was no wars while he was president. I don't know what planet he was living on.
The whole world, other than ISIS, which I inherited, and I knocked out ISIS in a matter of weeks. It was supposed to take 4 to 5 years. I did it in a matter of weeks. We actually have a great military. We don't know how to use it, but we have a great...
Mind you, the operation he's talking about that he finished was an Obama-era operation called Operation Inherent Resolve. It was started by the Obama administration and then finished by many of the early Trump appointees during the Trump administration, many of whom are not big fans of Trump anymore, by the way.
John, with great respect, I was asking about tariffs. You've gone off about that. Seeing you brought up tariffs and foreign policy, many people would say the biggest problem with your tariffs is actually geopolitics. You, in your first term, you got some credit for effectively saying that there was a Cold War against China. That's what America was in. You look at the last Cold War.
By the way, listen to this. This is where I think he's going delusional. This is like the little stuff, the tiny things I think is getting delusional. The interview gets worse, by the way. Listen to this.
Many people would say the biggest problem with your tariffs is actually geopolitics. You, in your first term, you got some credit for effectively saying that there was a...
He's saying I got a lot of credit before he even knows what the thing is. The interview didn't finish. He said, you've gotten some credit for, and he didn't get the finish. And he said, I got a lot of credit for it. He doesn't even know what it is. And he's already claiming lots and lots of credit, but from some people, not him, not himself, but from some people are saying, he's getting a lot of credit from somebody and he doesn't know who that person is, who those people are, or what the topic is, but he's got a lot of credit.
There was a Cold War against China. That's what America was in. You look at the last Cold War against the Soviet Union, America won it in part because it rallied allies to it. You're talking about slamming allies with 30%, 20% tariffs. isn't this time you're going to end up trying to rally the West and you're dividing it instead? Isn't that the real problem with tariffs, even beyond all the problems due to the economy, where you keep on bringing out these individual examples, but the overall effect is going to be dramatic?
No, the overall
answer first about foreign policy.
Yeah, I'll do that.
How does it help you take on China, turning all your allies against you?
Tremendously, because China thinks we're a stupid country, a very stupid.
You know, if you put a 20% tariffs on imported German goods, it's going to be hard to keep these allies with the United States as they deal with issues like the counterbalancing of Chinese power in the Pacific as they try to put more power and influence on the Taiwanese. So how are we going to keep these countries on our side and also, of course, avoid escalatory counter tariffs in a trade war with the Europeans, who's our second largest export market? China think we dumb. China think I buy the think dumb man. Dumb, I smart man. I be smart. Get the fuck guy off stage. Put him in a retirement home.
Stupid country. They can't believe that somebody finally got wise to them. Not one president, Bush, Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, have you heard of him? Not one president, think of it, not one president charged China anything. They said, oh, they are a third world nation, they're a developing. Well, we're a developing nation too. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at our cities. We're a developing nation. We have to develop more than they do. We're way behind them. You take a look at what's happened to our cities. So what
How is he saying we're way behind China? In what categories is this referring to? Like, I mean, certain like types of manufacturing, but a certain isn't true when it comes to cost of living. Certainly isn't true when it comes to like per capita GDP or like we're behind in some things, we're ahead in other things. Why would he just, the thing is, it's always when he's in office, we're better than everybody. When he's not in office, we're the worst thing ever. It's like that, he did this one podcast interview where, you know, I think it was like a centrist like interview, and he was like, man, you always talk down America, but America's always good. That's where I disagree. It was somebody will probably link the clip, but it's just it always has to be like that. It always has to be the black and white dichotomy.
My question was about your allies, not about China. You are going to annoy the people you need to rally behind you.
But our allies have taken advantage of us more so than our enemies.
How could you, in reference to what? Is this in reference to like NATO's spending policy? Is this in reference to like when it comes to trade, that they're selling more cars in the United States? Like, look, if you want to be more productive than the Europeans, I got good news for you. The European productivity has plateaued for years. The Europeans are not more productive than they were 20 years ago. We in the United States are becoming much more productive than the Europeans. We're exporting more to Europe. Their second biggest export market is in Europe. And a 20% tariff on those goods will lose that we do get from Europe, the Belgian chocolates, the German Mercedes cars, etc. That could very well quickly lead to counter tariffs from these countries. And if we got a EU-wide counter tariff or very calculated and coordinated policy of counter tariffs to try to quickly reverse this, you could very quickly get into a super destructive trade war. We're going to see stock markets get affected. It's going to see the increase of these goods. We're going to see increased costs. Trump being Trump, if you think he's immediately going to back down, I mean, maybe if he had some reasonable people in the room, they could say, well, let's bring it down to a 5% tariff and slowly de-escalate and then negotiate a better position. And they fearing I think Trump's the type of person who'll be surrounded by complete yes men this time. He fired most of his cabinet picks, hate him now. He fired everybody that would reel him in. Last time when he ran for president, he didn't have enough time to pick his cabinet picks or pick everybody because he probably didn't think he was going to win. Then he wins and he quickly has a bunch of different people gather him some picks, many of whom are fired or run away by the end of his term. Those people are gone. It's now sycophants. And so he's surrounded by sycophants. He gets a counter tariff from the French. Do you think he's going to respond by de-escalating? Do you think he's going to respond by being reasonable in negotiations when he needs to be? I'm not saying Trump can't play hardball. Sure, he can play hardball unless somebody's complimenting him enough, I guess. But he can play hardball in some scenarios. Can he know when to take his pedal off the metal when the situation's got bad and we need to de-escalate? Because I could very quickly see him, okay, 20% was enough, 25. Listen to his logic from earlier in this conversation. Some people think the problem is that we need to just jack it up super, super, super high, so then they immediately come back to the United States. So under that economic logic, if he does a 20% tariff across the board and then people counter tariff, he could just justify to himself increasing it to 100%, 200%, 300%. I mean, he was talking to the press the day before this, literally saying the numbers don't matter. 100 for 20. He said 100%, 200, 300, 400, 500. I don't care. We're just throwing numbers out. So, I mean, if this next government does not have anybody pulling him in, and I don't think J.D. Vance is going to be the man to do that, I do not think a reabsorbed Michael Flynn post-conviction is going to do that. Who's going around on this QAnon touring. So I'm a little concerned about the state of the economy in Trump world.
Our allies are the European Union. We have a trade deficit of $300 billion with the European Union. Our allies are Japan. You know, Abe was a very good friend of mine. He was a great guy, great. And I said to him in Japan, he was assassinated. And he was a great man. He really was. I didn't see too many like him. And he got very sick and he had to take off, and then he was actually making a comeback. He was going to make a comeback and he would have won easily. But he was a great gentleman, handsome, wonderful man, respected by everybody. And I went to him and I said, Shinzo, we have to...
By the way, post Shinzo, Japan really doesn't like him. And definitely after the connections with the cult, and I don't want to get into it, but you can go look it up yourself. The Liberal Democratic Party has a credibility issue with the Japanese public, and they've moderated the party. They went to Ishida. He was recently elected. He was somebody who was critical of Shinzo Abe. And part of the reason he got elected is part of the argument he made to party leaders was, look, I've been critical of the party at times, but that's why more of the Japanese public trusts me, and I can be a face of reform for the party. I can be a face for a new age. So how he's talking about Shinzo Abe is a little different than the Japanese public talking about Shinzo Abe. Of course, you don't endorse assassination. You can still be against it. You can still mourn a loss of a leader or whatever. But I'm just saying that that's how Japanese public has progressed on their opinion of Shinzo Abe. When he talked about the Shinzo Abe comeback and he would have brought the party back or whatever, I think that's nonsense. Thank you, Mouse the German, for the 250. Some support from Germany. Great channel. Thank you. Thank you. Danke.
Look, what? Trade. And he goes, I'll never forget it. I know. I said, what do you know? I knew you'd come to me. Why do you say that? Because I can't believe, I wouldn't tell the story if he was alive, actually. I said, I can't believe how many...
Yeah, because he might say that it's a lie.
years it's been that nobody even negotiated with us in America. I said, Shinzo, you have to pay for your cars. You're sending millions of cars. You don't accept a car from us. You don't have one car that you accept, and yet we're selling 3 million, 4 million of your cars. I said, Shinzo, on agriculture, you won't even accept our agriculture. And I renegotiated the whole trade deal. From a little
I wouldn't talk about this if Michael Jackson was still alive, but he always said that I'd make a great president.
Advantage because I was stuck with a bad deal. I mean, we have trade deals that were so bad that I said, who are the people that are doing it? They're either very stupid or they're getting paid off, okay? It's one or the other. It's very simple. We have the worst trade deals all over the world. South Korea, I love South Korea. They're wonderful people, extremely ambitious. They have a money machine. We protect them from North Korea and other people. North Korea is very nuclear. I got along with him very well, Kim Jong-un. Yes. But wait, they don't pay us anything. And I said, this is crazy. If I didn't put tariffs on,
By the way, what he's asking, he asked for something similar from Taiwan. He says that Taiwan needs to pay us in exchange for defense, which is a demand for a quid pro quo relationship with our allies. That they pay us financially and we return by giving them the defense of American empire, right? It's a quid pro quo relationship. I think that a shared relationship based off of a shared security commitment, so the Chinese couldn't just come in and offer like, okay, they're offering you 10 billion a year. How about we give you 50 billion and you just let us have the island? Like, you can see how quickly this could, if it becomes a quid pro quo and like whoever pays the most to America, there are concrete security reasons why America wants to have Korea as an ally in the region. It allows us to continue to dispute in the South China Sea. It allows us to keep a better hold on a rogue nuclear state. There's a historical relationship there, increased trade between our two nations. Like there is the South Korean support. There's a bunch of reasons that exist for that. And I think that basing our security arrangements around that makes more sense. If there's not a good reason for us to defend South Korea or Taiwan, then we shouldn't defend South Korea or Taiwan. We should not bid away the possible lives of our soldiers for $5 billion here, $10 billion there. I think it should be based on shared security commitments and economic stability, but I don't like the idea of this quid pro quo on our alliances. I don't.
The motor companies, the car companies, they make most of their money at small trucks. I put tariffs on China, but I put 27.5%. Otherwise, we'd be flooded with China, and all of our factories would close. We'd have no jobs at all in the auto industry. That goes for electric, by the way, which is a killer, which I've explained, and I don't think I have to bore anybody by talking about.
They're Celts, not Vikings. It doesn't matter. Okay, they're all historical white people. It's all this, like the same year. History started in 1776, and everything before that was a mistake, said by a proud and brave American thought leader.
But I put tariffs on South Korea because they were sending in trucks, and I put tariffs on, fairly substantial tariffs. Do you know that our car companies make almost all of their money with the small trucks, SUVs and small trucks? If I took those tariffs on, you would be inundated. Every car company would be out of business. And I got calls from Ford. I got calls from everybody saying, "Sir, I can't believe you're doing this for us. You saved our company. We were going. They make all their money with this. They make most of their money with the small truck and the SUVs.
Many consumers ended up with more expensive cars. But let me just come at you on foreign policy.
You wouldn't have a car company.
You have said that Taiwan should pay for U.S. protection.
Yeah.
I ask because this morning you just mentioned North Korea. The Chinese army, literally as we speak, are engaged in rehearsals for a full naval blockade of Taiwan. So I suppose my question to you, if China invades Taiwan, would you send American troops to defend it?
Well, the reason they're doing it now is they're not going to do it afterwards, okay? So it's, so they're doing it now. They want to do it China. Now, look, I had a...
Is he saying they're going to invade now, or they're doing drills now because they can't do drills afterwards? I mean, I remember during the Trump administration, there were reports that the Chinese would call Trump and say, "I don't like that there's this American representative in Taiwan. Tell them to leave." And then Trump would call his staff frantically and tell them to pull out of there. Trump abandoned Joshua Wong in Hong Kong. He doesn't care anything about like the democracy. There's no ideological commitment to Taiwan whatsoever for him. That's why he wants to develop a quid pro quo relationship. There's no shared security commitments there. So it's pure, for him, it's just a cost benefit analysis of what can you give us? And he's ignoring any need for, freedom of navigation in South China Sea and how Taiwan can support that, or, the trade relationship maybe, but it's pure. He's seeing it purely through the logic of dollar signs and this, you give me this and then I will give you this defense. There's no shared commitment. There's no shared security concerns or the idea of, having an ally to come to your aid. And it's all just pay us, which of course, if anybody can come in and offer more, then you've immediately ran into a security problem.
I had a very good relationship with President Xi.
And I didn't get to finish my point though. And it got worse and worse and worse to the point where he was yelling at staff how he didn't care about Taiwan. He didn't care about Hong Kong. He didn't want to hear about it anymore because he was getting called from Xi so much. And Trump has his belief so much in these personal relationships that he makes with these strongmen that he thinks he can use to get the best deals and the best everything for the United States. But a lot of times they use it to get exactly that for Russia and China at the expense of the United States or of the United States allies, because, they can compliment Trump and get his favoritism through flattery or other form. Nothing explains to me him sending the COVID testing machines to Putin during the height of the pandemic, when people in the United States were dying in record numbers from C-19, and there were a shortage of these goods, and he was giving them to Putin's personal stash. How do you do that outside of the fact that you want Putin's personal approval because you think that could grease the wheels in some way? And I think that often overtakes his thinking about what's best for the United States, is that want for that personal flattery. But that seems to not matter when it comes to our allies.
very good relationship with Putin and a very
Except for the Dutch prime minister, he seemed to be able to roll Trump's pockets a little bit. Mark Rutte, the guy who became the head of NATO, that's the one saving grace of a Trump presidency, is Mark Rutte might be the man to be able to convince him that, you know, European defense is a little bit important.
good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe. And by the way, today it was announced for those that he just blew up the railroad going into South Korea. That means South Korea is now cut off from Russia and China and various other places.
What is he talking about? They're cut off. What does he think that like North and South Korea were? It's the own can of worms, but whatever. Millions and billions of dollars of South Korean trade traveling through North Korea on its way to Russia. Like what? What did they?
Cut off by rail.
Mr. Trump, you just mentioned.
No, but these are big things. I have to mention them.
Yeah, you just mentioned Putin though, and this.
Yeah.
And by the way, somebody just asked in chat, does he think that North Korea allowed train shipments into South Korea? That seems to be what he thinks. Yes. Yes. There was a railroad, but it wasn't trading all this goods to Russia and China. I don't know what this was like. I think we can go look it up, but it wasn't used as a major road, as a rail transport to Russia.
In this controversy of the past week, can you say yes or no whether you have talked to Vladimir Putin since you stopped being president?
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
See, this is the thing. I'm telling you, this is what he thinks. He thinks that he's friends with them, and he does these favors for him, and so they'll do favors for him back for the United States. But the problem is, the favors that they're going to do back is either going to be for Trump personally. This is what I think. This is going to be for Trump personally, so it's not going to be stuff that's beneficial to the United States. Like Trump just did a favor to Putin personally by giving him the COVID machines, even though that doesn't help the Russian public. It wasn't like aid to Russia. It was specifically aid to help keep Putin and his cronies alive. So it's going to be something in return to Trump, or there's going to be a problem when we have such a conflict of interest, say over Taiwan or Ukraine or these other places, which clashes with our interest, because they're not going to give us stuff in return in those areas. They don't. And so it could just be you scratch their back and then they say, screw you, or they compliment you enough that okay, that's enough. That's enough. I do not think Trump has the magic recipe for solving the war in Ukraine. I think if he had any idea, any inkling of how to actually solve the issue and stop the Russians from invading again and not have some short-term peace deal, he would have revealed it. And I don't think the Doha agreement shows him to be a fantastic negotiator that takes in the concerns of locals or that makes like a stable foundation for withdrawal.
Of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
That sounds very much like you did talk to him.
I don't talk about that.
You talk about talking to Netanyahu, you talk about talking to these people.
Russia has never had a president that they respect so much, but more importantly, or less importantly, I guess, I went into Russia, and people said, oh, he likes Putin.
Do we really think like, oh, Putin's respect that's going to be enough? Putin's going to be like, I like Trump, so now all these things that we disagree on, it's okay. You know, we drank and we got along. No, that's not how it works. The Russia's security interests are still the same from the viewpoint of the regime if Trump, Biden, or any of the rest of them are in office. They just seem to think, and from their continued efforts to get Trump elected, continue to work in the goal of that Donald Trump would be a better president for them, for their interests, if he was to get elected. That they'd be able to either solidify their control of territory in Ukraine or be able to end American support for Ukraine and possibly even undercut American support for NATO, which opens up more opportunities down the road.
Putin likes him. Let me tell you, the first thing I did was terminated Nord Stream 2. Nobody ever heard of Nord Stream 2. It's a pipeline from Russia to Germany and all over Europe. I said, wait a minute, to NATO. I said, so let's get this straight. My first meeting, I said, so Putin's building the biggest pipeline in the world. He's going to Germany, but all over Europe. And You're paying him billions of dollars a year, billions of dollars a month. Germany's paying billions of dollars a month.
When he says nobody's heard of these things, does he just like talk about the wider American public, or like this? Like the news covered it. It's not like it was an unknown, or like people in the gas markets and the natural people knew about it. So I just assume it's like nobody knew about this trade deal. It's like, what you mean by nobody is that it, like, the average person didn't have a depth of knowledge of the specific pipeline. Yes.
And we're supposed to protect you against the guy that you're paying all this money to. So is there something wrong with my thinking? So he's building a pipeline to...
By the way, while you're placing 20% tariffs here, 50% tariffs there on all these European goods, how are we going to get them to like assist the United States when it comes to, like, if we come out and we say you need to stop this pipeline, you need to do this for America's security, we need you to be harder on the Chinese for us. Are we going to really be able to accomplish that in the midst of a trade war where the European economy has a lot of issues with trying to increase productivity, trying to coordinate, like the EU taking upon debt to meet the energy production goals and other goals that they have? Like, is this going to be the moment that they're going to want to play ball with not only a tariff war, but also helping America with its security interests? I don't know, Chief.
Germany, and we're spending, and by the way, until I got there, we were spending almost 100% for NATO.
I don't know how much more of this we're going to watch. We'll watch some more of it because he continues to spiral a bit, and I want to watch as much of this as possible, so just to get the point home about, like, I'm telling you, man, he's not as sharp as he used to be, but we got to keep watching.
Because
at least a little bit more, and then we'll move over to the big debate.
Because we had all these delinquent countries, they weren't paying. When I got there, I said, you know what? And by the way, my biggest fan is Stoltenberg, just leaving, Secretary General of NATO. He said when Bush came in, he made a speech and left. When Obama came in, he made a speech and left. When Trump came in, he made a speech and he said, let me see your books. And I found out in the books that nobody was paying. There were only 7 countries that were paying. We were supporting NATO. They screw us on trade so bad, the European nations. And then on top of that, they were screwing us on the military. So they're taking a tremendous advantage of us, $350 billion on trade, and we're then supporting them. In other words, it's not sustainable. You can't keep doing this. You can't have that, China, all of these countries. And stupid people made these deals. I saw trade deals that were so stupid that you'd have to be, that was so bad that you'd have to be an idiot to sign them. And we signed them for years. I could tell you trade deals that I have never seen anything. I said, who would agree to this? They had to be corrupt. They had to be corrupt. To make those deals, they had to be corrupt because there is no way a rational human being.
Let me read you a quote from the Rolling Stone. They just published an article on this. It quickly became clear that the former president has no conception of the mechanics of or the potential ramification of the economic platform he's running on. Bluntly, the former president was incoherent when pressed with real questions.
I always say either corrupt or extremely stupid, because there's no way a rational human being would ever sign the trade deals that this country signed. And I got out of many of those deals. I told South Korea, I'm sorry, you're going to have to pay for your military. We have 40,000 troops over there. You're going to have to pay. You become a very wealthy country. Just to finish, you become a very wealthy. They said, no, 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 we will not pay. We will not. We haven't paid since the Korean War. I said, no, you got to pay. I said, would $5 billion a year to start off with? No, no. They went crazy. They agreed to 2. I got $2 billion for nothing. And I said, here's what we're going to do. They said, we can't agree to this because we have to go through Parliament. They have the Parliament or whatever their legislature is. I said, that's okay. I fully understand that. Make it $2 billion. But next year I'm going to talk to you again. And I was going to make it $5 billion. And they knew it was coming. The happiest people to see that it was Biden instead of Trump with them, South Korea. You know what they did? They cut off the deal that I made where they were paying us. They backed to nothing because they went back to Biden and they gave it to him for nothing. They were willing to pay. We have 40,000 troops in harm's way, very serious, because you have North Korea is a very serious power. They have tremendous nuclear power. And I said to South Korea, you got to pay. And they agreed to do it. And Biden then cut it back, and it's a shame. And I could tell you 50 deals. And if I were there now, they'd be paying us $10 billion a year.
1 second,
and you know what? They'd be happy to do it. It's a money machine. So.
Let me play the Fox News perspective on what we're hearing from Trump tonight, from Laura Ingraham.
Now, how many politicians can step out on stage with no notes and lay out the intricacies of U.S. trade policy, the Federal Reserve, interest rates, etc., with a hostile reporter? Now, I can count how many people can do that on like one hand.
He just told stories. Dylan, what's your policy on Obamacare? Well, you know, the Three Little Pigs had these houses. And, you know, there was this big bad wolf. No, man, it's not doing anything for me. That's not, what do you mean the intricacies of storytelling is not intricacy?
South Korea. You're going to mention Taiwan. You wanted to mention Taiwan.
No, you mentioned Taiwan. You said you would defend them. You also seemed to imply that on Putin you would not. Putin, you seemed to imply that you had talked to him without actually confirming it.
I said I don't comment on those things.
What about? Can I ask you a particular thing about the dollar? You talked about wars at the New York Economic Club. You said that if you lost the dollar as a reserve currency, it would be like America losing a war.
Yeah.
You look at what you're going to do in terms of protectionism, drive countries to use the other currencies, and all that debt is also going to lessen the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Do you worry about that?
The dollar is so secure, your reserve currency is the strongest it'll ever be. And
you say that, President Trump, at the moment there is a thing called the Trump trade in the markets. Do you know what that is? The Trump trade is very simple. People are betting that your policies are going to drive up debt. They're going to drive up inflation.
This is true.
So they're going to drive up interest rates.
It's not good PR for Trump, but it's true.
Are the investors wrong?
Yeah, I had 4 years no inflation. I had 4 years no inflation.
But that was when you had much.
I had 4 years. It's better than that. And Biden, who has no idea where the hell he is, okay? Biden went 2 years with no inflation because he inherited from me. And then they started spending money like drunken sailors. They spent so much money. It was so ridiculous.
The Trump administration increased the deficit more than the Biden administration. He was a bigger, I mean, the deficit was higher under Trump than it was under Biden. I don't know what to say.
The money they were spending on the Green New Scam. The Green New Deal, you know, it was conceived of by AOC plus 3. She never even studied the environment in college. She went to a nice college. She came out, she just said, the Green New Scam. She just named all these things.
President Trump, the issue at the moment, the markets are looking at the fact you are making all these promises. Latest one was car loans. You're flooding the thing with giving giveaways.
But we're
I was actually quite kind to you. I used
0NK3Y has donated $30. Thanks for the great work, Dylan. Gonna travel to Borispol to visit my GF's family for first time since start of full-scale
invasion soon. Nervous but excited. Hope for a peaceful future. Amen, brother. Amen. Amen. Hope for peace. Prepare for anything else. Thank you so much for the $30, and I hope your GF's family's doing well. Hope everything's peaceful for them. Hope they're able to, you know, hunker down and survive the rest of this, man.
Trillion. The upper estimate is 15 trillion. People like the Wall Street Journal, who's hardly a communist organization,
yeah, but you don't know.
They have criticized you on this as well. You are running up enormous debt.
What does the Wall Street Journal know? I'm meeting with them tomorrow. What does the Wall Street Journal know? They've been wrong about everything. So have you, by the way. You've been wrong about
You're trying to turn this.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, attacking the moderator plays good to his audience. It does not play good to the majority of people. I don't think it does. He might disagree, but I really don't think it does. The questions are tough, but none of the questions have been unfair. They've all just been tough, and there's been follow-ups because Trump doesn't want to answer the questions, and instead he opens up his big book of stories about the many times he saved the country, and instead of like answering the questions directly, he just talks about, this is the deal that I'm going to make. I'm going to be a good deal maker. I'm going to do this deal, and here's the story about how he did a deal, instead of answering the tough question.
Trying to turn this.
You've been wrong.
No, you're trying to turn this into debate. There are business people. There are
but
business
you're wrong.
people.
You've been wrong. You've been wrong all your life on this stuff. You've been wrong.
Not
Let
on
me
the
tell you
issue.
about currency. You're going jumping a lot of different subjects.
Whilst you're sticking to the subject very
let's
closely.
stick to reserve currency. That's where you start,
Yeah.
right? The reserve currency is under threat because you have Iran, you have Russia, you have China. China's the one that you have to worry about.
Dylan, what's your ethnicity? I know you're some kind of white but mixed.
Who knows? Who knows?
Because they want it.
Yeah.
They want to have the yuan be the,
Nah, I'm German and Irish, and I think a little bit of Scottish.
the
Yes.
thing of power. So here's what I'm doing. Again, I hate to go back to it. If somebody says, and I know countries want to get out because they don't respect our leadership, they look at this guy, they say, you got to be kidding, and she's worse than him. By the way, I never thought I'd say this. She is not as smart as Biden, if you can believe it. This is not what we had 4 years of this lunacy, and we can't have it anymore. We're not going to have a country left. Okay, currency, very important.
Yes.
And if you want to go to third world status, lose your reserve currency. We have to have that. We cannot lose it.
But if we increase these tariffs to make it so, instead of there being decreased trade, I mean, instead of us increasing our export, which just makes us more competitive, while also still taking in imports, so we can but instead we just cut off the world markets with these tariff increases. That means they're not going to be trading in US dollars. They're going to go trade with other countries, and maybe they'll trade with different currencies. And then is that not going to reduce our strength as the world reserve currency if we have this trade decrease? Whereas currently we're a center of world trade.
You'll go to third world status in this country because you take a look at the way things are running. If a country tells me, sir, we like you very much, but we're going to no longer adhere to being in the reserve currency. We're not going to salute the dollar anymore. I'll say, that's okay. And you're going to pay a 100% tariff on everything you...
But you fucking moron! Every answer to everything is a tariff. You're not giving us enough exports. You're not taking enough American exports. Tariff. You're not paying enough for a tariff. You piss off Trump's of tariffs. Just tariff everything. Tariffs. If they're not going to trade with the United States because of our tariffs, just offering to tariff them harder, what if that just expedites them not wanting to trade with the United States?
Sell into the United States, and we love your product. I hope you sell a lot of it into the United States, but you're going to pay 100% tariff. He will then follow it up by saying, sir, it would be an honor to stay with the reserve currency. That will be like just playing. That's not even chess, that's checkers. But you don't have listen to this, you don't have other people that can talk that way. A lot of people say, we love Trump's policy, but we would like to have another messenger because we don't like him. He's a little bit crass. And then, actually, it was Lindsey Graham, I must say. He was a progressive, in all fairness. But Lindsey Graham said...
Lindsey Graham, the progressive. Okay, sure.
But Trump's policy doesn't work without Trump. And there's a lot of truth to that. Macron was going to, nice guy, Emmanuel. He's a wise guy, but he's for France, and we're for the USA. You know this story. He was going to tax American companies.
Can we just move forward? He basically, France wants to tax American companies in France. Trump says, I'm going to do this tariff on French wine imports. Macron then reverses policy in 3 minutes, according to Trump. Okay, that's just Trump's retelling of the story. Anyway, we're skipping it because I would like to get back to the questions.
So let me just tell you. So I said, no, I'm just...
He's still telling the story. Sorry. It was the interviewer wanted to ask, be like, hey, we're talking about the questions again. And Trump was like, no, I need to finish the story. Anyway.
Let me ask you a very factual question. The Federal Reserve, you say you don't want interest rates to go higher. You've gone backwards and forwards about whether you want to keep Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. His term as chair runs on to May 2026. Would you seek to remove or demote him?
Look, I think it's the greatest job in government.
Answer the question, then explain your answer. Don't immediately find ways to avoid it.
You show up to the office once a month and you say, let's see, flip a coin. And everybody talks about you like you're a god. Oh, what will he do? I mean, before, the guy used to walk into my office, he was like begging. Oh, he was fine.
But you did talk you talked about removing him once.
I did, because he was keeping the rates too high.
Yeah.
And I was right.
And you would do that again?
In fact, he actually dropped them too much when I did this. Because I said I was threatening to terminate him. There was a question as to whether or not you could. And there was an article in the New York.
Said he's willing to deal with 10 years of economic recession to take our country back. Clock cleaning time, in my opinion.
10 years of economic recession to take our country back. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? Take our country back. So it means we make the stuff here again in these certain industries? Okay, but what does that mean when it's just increased costs for Americans? And let's say you even take back in these core industries. What about all the tariffs on all the goods that we don't get domestic alternatives for? That just means increased costs across the board. So not only increased costs with some return and some manufacturing coming back for all those people who don't benefit from those manufacturing jobs, they're not going to really, well, whatever, but manufacturing got back. Okay, what about all the goods that we're not going to have domestic alternatives for? You're not taking the country back, you're just taxing Americans more. Is that how we got to just advertise sorry, the income tax is actually the Patriot Plus program? Is that how we need to advertise stuff to get the MAGites on board?
New York Times, 2 half pages. 1 page said I can do it by lawyers. 1 half page said I couldn't. And that was enough for him. And he dropped the hell out of the rates. He dropped them too much. He went so, he dropped them actually too much. Okay. Here's the story. I think that if you're a very good president with good sense, you should be able to at least talk to him. I don't say make the decision at all, but I've been a very...
Yeah, but if you're I'm going to remove you unless you don't do this, and then they do that, I don't... In effect, are you not just telling them what to do? The whole point is that the Federal Reserve should be unrestrained by the president, who has open political and partisan reasons to want the rates to go certain ways to benefit them in the short term or politically. But that clashes with the long-term economic health of the country, and so the head of the Federal Reserve should be able to make independent decisions about the rates. If you're threatened to fire them anytime the rates are not up to your political persuasion, then are you not just in effect doing the same thing as just telling them what to do?
Successful businessman. I've done really good, much better. Now people are understanding how good I've done because they're seeing it much better than the fake news wants to give me credit for.
Just on the issue of whether you would replace
I think I have the right to say, as a very good businessman and somebody that's used a lot of sense, I think I have the right to say that, I think I'm better than he would be. I think I'm better than most people would be in that position. I think I have the right to say I think you should go up or down a little bit. I don't think...
I'm telling you, abundance of confidence, rejection of experts leads to this type of decision making. I know better than you, so I should make the decisions, kind of, really. I mean, actually, not really. I shouldn't fire them, but I should be able to have a say, and that say should be connected to the constant threat of being fired. I just coerce them into doing what you want.
I should be allowed to order it, but I think I have the right to put in comments as to whether or not interest rates should go up or down.
When you looked at the Supreme Court, you came up with a list of people
I did.
Who you thought of replacing, bringing in as Supreme Court justices. Yeah. Would you do that with the Federal Reserve?
Well, I no longer need it. It was a great thing. In fact, a lot of people said I got elected because of that. I was an unknown quantity. I was very known as a business guy, but I wasn't known as a political person or the leader.
There's a YouTube channel called Puma_Brage_official where the channel owner owns a pet puma, wears a Wagner Group hat, and whose video comment section are pro-Russian. Just found it interesting.
Weird. Thank you for the $10. Pet puma, huh? Well, who knows how that story is going to end?
Leader of a country. And people were very worried about, actually they were worried, am I going to be liberal, if you want to know the truth? And somebody said, would you come up with a list of 20 or 25 justices, in this case mostly judges, that you'd put in case it were necessary? Now, it's amazing because I got 3 in 4 years. Most people get none. Because, you put them in the young, you tend to put them in young. Only stupid people put old. You know, you don't put old in because they're there for 2 years or 3 years.
You're a
So you
78,
put them
you're a
in your-
78-year-old
so
man running for president.
I got 3. A lot of judges, a lot of presidents.
That's like the first punch from the reporter. That's the first punch for the entire. In my opinion, everything up to this point has been a fair game. That is like a little rabbit punch he just threw out there, which, I mean, it's true. It's true. Should he be throwing that out there? I don't know. I feel like he's got the right to counterfire, but I mean, I don't know. Is that a fair follow-up question? Oh, you should put them in while they're young. You don't elect somebody that's only going to be in there for a few years. I mean, you're 78 running for president.
None. I got 3. And I think they've been 3 great choices, too, by the way. But
Just on the-
Everybody ready for President J.D. Vance?
Federal
by
Reserve,
the way, I think they have been really great choices. But I got 3 judges, and you know what they want to do? They want to now put up to 25 justices into the Supreme Court, the radical left, and that can't happen. So I think I've done a great job on putting in justices and 300 judges, and that made a tremendous difference in the country. You know, I was a little lucky because Barack Hussein Obama did not get his judges approved. A lot of them. So I ended up with 125 judges before I got there. So again, most presidents don't even get to put a Supreme Court judge in because there's 9, and you know they're there for a long time. Most of them are there for a very long time, and I got 3, which is a very unusual situation. I got
By the
3.
way, the question was about appointments to the Federal Reserve head. Like, that's what we're talking about right now. And now we're just talking about Supreme Court appointments. This is another weave of his.
In 4 years.
Maybe we can change the subject to technology, seeing you wouldn't answer about the Federal Reserve. The US Justice Department is thinking about breaking up Alphabet, as Google likes to be known now. Should Google be broken up?
I just haven't gotten over something the Justice Department did yesterday, where Virginia cleaned up its voter rolls and got rid of thousands and thousands of bad votes. And
I'm sorry, what was the question?
yesterday,
To be known now, is thinking about breaking up Alphabet.
Why are we talking about Georgian election voter rolls and the election and whether it's going to be, but now they're like, oh, they're going to steal the, why do we need to get into this nonsense right now when he just asked a very simple regulatory economic question at the economic club, not the election 2024, stop the steal point 2.0, electric boogaloo, no. It's the economic club of Chicago asking a simple economic question about breaking up big companies like Google. And now we're talking about Georgia voter rolls. He's not even pretending to pivot. He's just answering questions that weren't asked. He's just talking about whatever he wants to. It's like there's no interviewer in the room. Even though the interviewer is doing a decent job, it's just him. He's just a complete inability for Trump to even participate in the process of being interviewed. This is why his team is cutting down all these other interviews. Just answer the question and then get into other stuff. Answer the question. And this plays well to his base. This plays well to the people in his room that already support him. I don't think this plays well with independents. And I think they know it doesn't play well with independents. There's the reason why the independents that watched the presidential debate thought Harris won. She got a bump. Now the bump is gone because some time has passed. They don't want to give her any more bumps. I think that's why they're shutting down interviews like this. You want to know what Trump did yesterday? I don't know if you guys saw this. Trump had a rally where he talked for 30 minutes and then just stopped the rally and then just played music for 40 seconds. He played Ave Maria multiple times. He was playing YMCA and he was just dancing in the middle of it. And that was the end of the round. People just started leaving. It was like, okay. And they most stayed till the end dancing with him. But is that a better use of his time than an interview with 60 minutes? Is him dancing with his supporters for half the rally? And is that better use of his time than talking to the largest audience in the United States until the election?
Google likes to be known now. Should Google be broken up?
I just haven't gotten over something the Justice Department did yesterday, where Virginia cleaned up its voter rolls and got rid of thousands and thousands of bad votes.
Pravda's claiming that 18 North Korean soldiers have fled Russian positions to Ukrainian captivity. Well, until you see it, I won't believe it.
Votes. and the Justice Department sued them that they should be allowed to put those bad votes and illegal votes back in and let the people vote. So I haven't gotten over that. A lot of people have seen that. They can't even believe it.
The question is about Google, President Trump.
Yeah, look, Google's got a lot of power. They're very bad to me, very, very bad to me. I mean, I can speak from that standpoint. They only have bad stories. In other words, if I have 20 good stories and 20 bad stories, and everyone's entitled to that, you'll only see the 20 bad stories. And I called the head of Google the other day, and I said, I'm getting a lot of good stories lately, but you don't find them in Google. I think it's a whole rigged deal. I think Google's rigged just like our government is rigged all over the place.
That none of this has to do with. By the way, think about this for a moment. The question is about breaking up Google, and instead of talking about like things like monopolization of some industries or like being too big, it's not fair, the competition. Instead of considering any of that, it's immediately to, the search results on Google aren't positive enough for me. When I go to the platforms that like me, I find tons of stories that how about good I am. But on Google, you search my name, but you get bad stories. I think it's rigged. So when talking about the possibility of regulating Google, completely remove any interest of the rest of the country. It's all about him and how he's being covered, how he's being talked about. None of it has to do with control of the market or monopolization of the industry or being too big or fair competition. It's immediately all about how unfair Google is to him on the search results. Because when you look his name up, you hear all the stupid stuff he says.
Would break
it's ridiculous. It's not even an attempt to answer the question.
them up, in other words.
I do something, but you have to have, look, I give them a lot of credit. They've become such a power. It's such a power, and you got to give them credit for that. How they became a power is, really the discussion. At the same time, it's a very dangerous thing because we want to have great companies. We don't want China to have these companies. Right now, China is afraid of Google. Right now, China is a very powerful, very smart group of people. I will tell you that from very personal experience.
There's an example of a Chinese tech company at the moment, TikTok.
Yeah.
You initially wanted to ban TikTok. Now you like it, apparently, for some reason to do with Facebook.
Yeah.
There is a decision coming up, if you became president.
Yeah.
Its Chinese parent would have to sell it, I think it's by January the 19th. Would you force them to do that?
So I originally had it all done, and then I said to Congress, your decision. I said, I'm not going to, pull any strings, nothing. Your decision. You make it. But I had it all done. And I said, you make it. And they decided not to make it. I didn't care if they made it or not, because to me it was a flip of a coin. You have some real First Amendment problems. You have a lot of problems.
You just talked about Chinese technology, the need to defend against it, TikTok and the threat people see to many.
Thank you, member Maxius 1975 for the tier 2 sub on YouTube. He reminds me of a drunk starting a story, forgetting where he started, just rambles, hoping to remember the point. This is why I'm feeling like he's declining. There's not even an attempt to answer the question. He doesn't seem to understand the effects of his own platform whatsoever. He's not doing as many rallies as he used to do. He's doing 1/3 of the rallies he used to do in 2015, 2016. As the election's coming closer, they're shutting down 60-minute interview opportunities after this interview. And they're shutting down other interview opportunities like 2 hours before it went live. Another story broke about another interview opportunity they're shooting down that they had already agreed to. It wasn't even like a negative network anyway. It was like it was an area they're going to go to and get likely positive coverage. And they're shutting this stuff down. I don't know if they really want to have Trump in public much the next 20 days. We'll see. If they do have much in public, is it going to be more 20, 30-minute dance sessions of just like, hey, we're headed to the finish line, just hoping that Harris can't picture stuff enough? And Trump will dominate the narrative enough to get out there just through pure momentum from 9 years of being a public figure versus the few months Harris has had to picture stuff to the country? I don't know.
And American children and things like that.
Yeah, but
why do you no longer see TikTok as a security threat?
I think it is a threat. Frankly, I think
This is a great question, by the way. Trump flip-flopped flip-flopped on TikTok. He used to be 100% for banning it and kicking it out of the country. Then a businessman who comes to him who had a big stake in TikTok, has a private meeting with him, comes out, and he reverses his plan. He reverses his policy. This seemed like just straight up flip-flopping on it because of business interests, overriding what he said was a national security concern.
You know, you have some real First Amendment problems. You have a lot of problems.
You just talked about Chinese technology, the need to defend against it, TikTok and the threat people see to many kind of American children and things like that.
Yeah, but
why do you no longer see TikTok as a security threat?
I think it is a threat. Frankly, I think everything's a threat. There's nothing that's not a threat. But sometimes you have to fight through these threats. You know, you can't just, like Google. I'm not a fan of Google. They treat me badly. But are you going to destroy the company by doing that? If you do that, are you going to destroy the company? What you can do without breaking it up is make sure that it's more fair. They do treat me very badly. Oh, and he told me, no way, you're the #1 person on all of Google for stories. I mean, which probably makes sense, to be honest with you. I actually agree. Most of them are bad stories, but these are minor details, right? And it's only bad because of the fake news, because the news is really fake. That's the one we really have to
So it seems to him, and this is the thing that scares me because of his relationship with people like Viktor Orban, who's speaking at CPAC now. The way they did it over there is that they took control of their cronies, Viktor Orban's cronies, took control of media organizations and then turned the state media apparatus into just pure Fidesz propaganda, which is Viktor Orban's party. The oligarchs around him that control the media apparatus made it more and more pro-Fidesz propaganda, and then they gave the opposition very little to basically no airtime, giving them basically no time to pitch their message to the world, even though the opposition is having a resurgence right now. We'll see if it crashes or not, as their coalition is kind of just, hey, we're here and we hate Orban. There's not really like an alternative concrete model necessarily, or like ideology that unites them all. We'll see how it goes. But I'm worried about some attempt by Trump to follow the Viktor Orban model. You need to increase your positive coverage if you don't want to be broken up a bit, huh?
And we have to straighten out our press because we have a corrupt press. That's the one we really.
Can I ask you about Silicon? I was in Silicon Valley recently. You talk to the tech bosses there and the tech people, and there seems to be a real fear that what you would do with tech is you would hand it over to Elon Musk and say, you sort it out.
No, I have great respect for Elon. Look, I saw that rocket ship come in yesterday and go right back to where it took off, to the gantry, I guess they call it. And I said, what the hell? I was on a phone talking about probably politics, and the television's on, and I'm seeing this big thing where the white paint was burned off it from the, thousands of miles an hour, the heat. And I see this big, massive tube that's 10 stories, 20 stories tall come down. I told the person on the phone, wait a minute, I'm seeing something I don't believe it. Neither does anybody else here. And I said, wait a minute. I forgot the guy was on the phone. He waited for a half hour. And I watched that come down, and I watched it come down and come right in between those big levers. And I said, and it looked to me like I was going to crash. It was coming in hot. And all of a sudden, boom, you see the motor, the fire kick in. And I called Elon. I said, that's the most incredible thing. I said, can Russia do that? Nope. I said, can the United States do it? Nope. He's the only one that can do it. And I said,
you now want to put him in charge of deregulation.
Not deregulation, cutting.
Cutting wasteful spending.
Cutting.
Every single president,
which would include
including
deregulation.
Every president comes in and talks about cutting wasteful spending.
Oh, there's tremendous waste.
Give me an example of something you will do that will get rid of government spending.
Well, let me give you an example. When I came in,
storytelling,
government,
airplane story.
I was the first thing.
An example going forward.
Well,
not what you did in the past.
This is going forward because it's the same thing. When I first sat down, a general came into my office and he said, "Sir, it's nice to meet you. Would you please sign this?" I said, "What is it?" It's a contract for a new Air Force One, which is actually 2 planes, not one, 2 Boeing 747. And I said, "How much is it?" $5.7 billion. It's a hell of an expensive plane, but there's reasons for that. He said, nope, I'm not signing it. I said, who negotiated it? Barack Hussein Obama.
Okay, we're done. I don't really want to listen to any more of this. Is there? Can we skip to like the end? I don't want to listen to this
No,
story.
I'm not-
The only
running
way-
for president.
Let me tell you, the only way you can do it
Let's see what else
is through
is
the
left.
threat of tariffs. It's the only way you
More
can
tariffs?
break, but I want you to start building your factories in this country, whether it's Texas or any other place, anywhere in the country. And he said, and this guy hasn't tried too much, I will tell you.
More
He said, you
stories.
saved my company.
All
Well,
the,
no, do you
attempts,
think it
all
was
the
on-
times it went to courts, the courts
No,
sided
it didn't
with the
go.
other.
They went to court, and the courts all said, you don't have standing. Nobody had standing.
Oh, this is the question about whether or not he's going to stand by the election results, and of course, you can expect the answer.
That means
They
you
all
will have,
love it.
that means you will have to deport. You know, you are talking about deporting 11 million people. That is a lot
Talking
of
about
people. to
immigration.
get out.
Honestly, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this. I think we get it. Final thoughts. They're scared of continuing to put this guy in semi-aggressive, not even hostile. This wasn't really a hostile interview as much as it was an aggressive, firm interview that turned hostile after he started punching the interviewer, saying, "You don't know, I know math. Do you know math? You're hostile. You were wrong about all." Even though, like, again, this is like the chief editor of Bloomberg, and the stuff like talking about like around tariffs and the negative effects of tariffs. They're not wrong about the broad consensus that is a 20% tariff on all goods is going to increase costs for consumers. Trump has to live in a black and white world. And so instead of saying there'll be some cost, but in the long run, no, he has to say there'll be no cost. Even though a 20% tariff across all goods isn't just a short-term negative, it'll be a long-term negative effect because there's some areas where we just will not be able to, in the short to medium term, in some areas, even in the long term, not be able to create domestic alternatives for it. But instead of saying like, well, if there's going to be some negative. No, it has to be, no, there's going to be no. There's going to be no increased cost for consumers. And so it's easy for any journalist, knowing that, of course, there is a downside to tariffs, to immediately confront him on that. And so now he tries to paint it like it's a hostile media environment when really a journalist is there to bring some reality to the situation, to ask questions, real questions about real issues. If journalists are just there to go there, ask a question, sit there and be like, and they don't ask a follow-up question, they kick their feet under their table, they get to hold their notebook on their lap, oh my god, I get to interview the president. If that's what journalists are supposed to do, throw me out of a window as soon as possible. I don't want to even be called anything close to a journalist. Because what a journalist is supposed to do is when somebody is there just to campaign, you're supposed to relate it to real issues for Americans. Because if not, then your job as a journalist is to just help the president campaign, is to help politicians campaign. And I feel a journalist is supposed to get a story and tell the people the truth and get politicians to answer hard-hitting questions about the economy. And if somebody in front of you is denying economic reality or broad economic consensus, they need to confront that. And if the president's going to reject economic consensus and say, I have the bold economic plan that nobody believes in, but we're going to strive for, he needs to still explain that. And he can't. He can't. And so he doesn't. And so he weaves. Oh boy, I got sent something. We're going to talk about Hassan next. Hassan and Asmongold.